Sports presents Benning Bites with Damon Benning. Benning Bites with Damon Benning.
It's another episode of Benning Bites. Appreciate you being a part of what we do. Apple, Google, Spotify. Just Google it. I used to hear that in my sleep, which means that I know that I need to just Google. But appreciate you being a part of what we do. My partner came back this yesterday morning, Andrew Rogers. The travel stories. That's kind of funny. It is. I always I reconcile in my head, especially with my kids traveling as much as they do for sports this summer, driving versus flying versus time in the car and a delay, like peace of mind. Do I know where my luggage is? Do I not know where my luggage is? What's going on with the flight schedule? I don't know. Anyway, that's kind of funny. So whatever you guys do in order to be a part of what we're doing, we appreciate it. It's guys and gals. I don't mean to use that as all inclusive, right? I know it's 2023, but I'm trying to stay out of the doghouse. And fantastic show yesterday. A lot we didn't get to. Even in the sports cleanup, we kind of like hem-hawed around and got the things that weren't primarily sports cleanup. But a lot of the talk dominated by the draft. Obviously the transfer portal. Um, Gosh, a ton, right? We even got into Nebraska baseball, Nebraska softball. The What's the stigma that surrounds local recruiting when it comes to like why are baseball, volleyball, and softball different for the state school versus football and basketball? Basketball has the stigma where sometimes it's like, and Sam McEwen brought this up. I thought it was fascinating where he said, sometimes guys come out of here and you're almost too good to go to Nebraska. Um, and then it was the other thing. Then it was the other thing where it was like, please. The other thing where it was like, with football, is it the pressure? Is it the perception? Because we don't have any problems reconciling in our even track is pretty good. So what's different about football and basketball on the national scale where we have like reservation or well we've got other guys or if we miss on a target it's like we rationalize it as a base. It's just weird. And maybe we'll delve into that a little more on the show because I definitely think it's a thing. And if we figured it out, maybe more of those folks stick around and the narratives that surround when they do or don't stick around go away. We just look at it for what it is, kind of like we do with the other three sports, which was always interesting to me. With regards to Casey Thompson, A.J. Allen, Jaleel Martin, Stephon Wynn, Noah Pola Gates. I mean, there are a lot of guys. Not a lot. I mean, a lot. A couple. Keep the ones that I think folks are really kind of thinking about are, Wynn, Thompson, and Allen. And I think all three of those cases are different, in my opinion. Casey is very, very interesting. And I challenge you guys to look into to give it kind of a framework. Look into the commitment continuum. It's a thank you. It's a fantastic kind of thought process philosophically on how to handle being competitive, what happens when you're competitive, how you go from being competitive to obsessive, and what that continuum looks like, right? You go from restraint to reluctant to existent to compliant to committed to compelled. At the very end, after compelled, there's obsessed. And so I think while we love to be competitive and to have fixation on something when it borders on obsession in terms of being I'm not even going to say unhealthy because that's not the right word. Where it's in conflict with like a year one staff when you're trying to set the culture of being other centered, you have to weigh that. Like that's important. And I think as much can be said about Nebraska being cognizant of obsession and competitiveness versus at what cost to set the culture. Because I think that's a real thing with Casey Thompson. And I'm not going to belittle him because I love his competitiveness. I've said for 2 years, he's almost too polished, almost politician like. He's very regimented, almost OCD. I compared him to Mr. McCall from The Equalizer. Now, he's not a killer, hopefully, knock on wood. Um, but very, very scripted. And there are a lot of those things I can appreciate. Remember when I would have those talks and I'd say, even his press conferences are perfect. He's grown up in this. His dad, Charles, his mom, they do a very good job of preparing him for the future in terms of being very measured. His pressers were fantastic. It's like, oh my gosh, that guy's a spokesperson. But with 1 year remaining, and even though it would have been extremely competitive, I believe a dogfight. And I'm on record, a dogfight with Jeff Sims. And I know full well, listen, I got all the low hanging fruit on social media. Oh, Rule was Sims was Rule's guy and listen to the pressers and all that. That's fine. That's a fan's perspective. Mine is that staff wanted competition. And they thought full well it was going to be a dogfight. And I talked for 6, 7 months that Casey is the type of person, 4 or 5 months, that Casey's the type of person that makes you uncomfortable that he's on the sidelines because you feel like you know what you're getting with him. Now, Nebraska and Casey had to rationalize just how uncomfortable do I want to be if he's on the sidelines, right? Like, that's a thing. And so when I say it makes sense, but not really, that he wants to do something else, I don't knock the hustle. Maybe he wants the sure thing. Maybe he's earned the right to have the sure thing. But don't for 1 minute try to reconcile in your head going to Auburn or Florida and a one-time deal where you have to move and it's another culture reset is somehow more advantageous than fighting it out with Jeff Sims when you're an ankle tweak away from having to play, right? I've given you the history. It's been since Tommy Armstrong where he started every game as the starter that the starting quarterback has not missed time. Now, I don't want to go into detail and think for Casey. I'm just telling you, you got to stop with the, well, it was going to be this and it was going to be that. Because I know the what. I know the what. Well aware. Handpicked. More athletic. 6'4", running quarterback. I know the what. Doesn't explain the why. And it doesn't necessarily make it an easy decision. Because I'm telling you, sure as I'm sitting here, it wasn't. It absolutely wasn't. So we can reconcile it however we want to in our heads. But the reality of it is there was a lot more to it than that, which there typically is when you get past the surface. Kind of a lot like I feel about A.J. Allen. We heard all the Gabe Ervin talk. We saw what was happening with Ramir Johnson. We loved what was happening with Anthony Grant's recommitment. And I said that Anthony Grant, for as far as he had, from where they had to come in the spring and then in the offseason versus how they finished the regular season, that Anthony Grant had the most that he had to change. I still believe that. And that came to fruition. And I said after the spring game that you could make the case that from what we thought and what our preconceived notion was about last time we saw players, Anthony Grant had the furthest to come. Gabe Ervin got all the love in the offseason. Ramir Johnson, he's so steady. He makes you uneasy because he just doesn't leave openings for you to take advantage of. If you're going to run him down from behind as a competitor at the same position, you better go get it because he's not going to make a ton of mistakes to leave the door open. So you have to weigh all those things, right? If you're AJ Allen, and he's going to have plenty of opportunities at other places. I said this and I maintain it. He was the most gifted of the natural runners that they had on the roster. Doesn't make him the best, because I think there were some other things at play here. But when you go from being in a yellow and a green jersey and you're not feeling pretty good and you got to hear about other guys, and Brian Applewhite was your guy, and you had a level of comfort during the recruiting process that allowed you to flip in the beginning. Because remember, you got AJ Allen late, and a lot of it had to do with Brian Applewhite. So when we're being dismissive, maybe not dismissive, but when you talk about depth, don't rationalize the decision just because you think we have depth. Because again, two things can be true at once. We can have depth, and it could still be, there still could be some situations or some circumstances that surround the departure. And I'm not, believe me, Kleenex does not say bless you for ODB. I'm not running, blowing my nose, wiping tears from my eyes over Casey Thompson or AJ Allen, but in the same vein, as a competitor and a coach and a former teammate of a lot of guys at a high level, I never want to be dismissive of guys' accomplishments and what they bring to the table either. It's not always so easy as to say, I just turn the other cheek and move on, next man up. Sometimes that's cool. Sometimes I have to stop and be appreciative of the opportunities and what surrounds people's decisions. And that's where I'm at with these two. So a lot going on. We'll delve into it more. And I'm not telling you have to have an opinion one way or the other. I just try to handicap you with the facts, and you can do with it what you will. And that's what makes the back and forth and having a talk show and having you folks be as interactive as you are fun. Because I'm going to learn something along the way, and hopefully you do too, because that's the way that I like to do business. Give my man Andrew Rogers a follow. He's at Andrew Rogers CC now, and I'm still at ODB. Coffee and Cream still does what it does. Stay tuned for a fantastic show coming up in just a few minutes. That's another episode of Benning Bites.